Board games, it's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Board games, in some manner, I'm not gonna shout. I am starting off this streaming with a little bit of singing. And today, as you can see, I am joined by the wonderful Sara Elsam. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I should have checked before we started. Please forgive me. Today we're going to talk about D&D and maybe one or two other RPGs and how they bring what's on the boundary of existence to life. And we can tease it out with the sharp end of a knife.
Wow.
RPGs is what we're talking about. Board games and RPGs and our hidden selves. I'm not going to shout. And hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it says, wherever you are, whenever you're watching. This is episode 390 of Busy Beats and Board Games and Blether. Today we are discussing Dungeons and Dragons and identities, and we are going to be talking a little bit about how Dungeons and Dragons specifically, and I guess role-playing games more generally, can help us think about who we are, things that maybe are lurking under the surface, and also help us, facilitate, improve our mental health, maybe allow us a form of expression that we didn't have. Also talking about the safety that's so important when we play with such things and talking about our shadow selves. Of course, this was a topic suggested by Sara, and thank you so much for joining me. It is honestly a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Bez.
Oh, and how would you like to be known if people are thinking, hey, I do not know anything about this Sara person? Like maybe they can read the banner that's going off underneath, but what would you say to that person who's like, yeah, who is Sara? Who are you? What are some of your favorite things? What do you do in the tabletop games industry?
I would beg those people not to judge me on my morning hair and my Steam Dog glasses. I'm such a wreck today. I'm so sorry.
You look fabulous.
Thank you. Oh, that's lovely. That's so kind. And so I basically work as a journalist, community manager, broadcaster. I've go on video. I talk about board games just in many different mediums, I guess is what I do. So I suppose that would probably be what I'd say to people is you may have read a rant that I did about something in a magazine or seen it on a video. And I'm also currently doing community management over at M Publishing, which is an independent tabletop RPG publisher. A bit of a mixed bag, but ultimately just super into my board games and my tabletop RPGs.
And I think it was one of your rants in one of the issues of Tabletop Gaming magazine where I was like, you know what, this person's saying some pretty cool things. And then I was like, oh, I wonder if I could ask them to be on my show. And hey, we got you on. So how many stats down? Like, I should start a checklist how many of the Tabletop Gaming magazine peeps I can get on here. Someday we'll have like a big friends reunion or something.
Yeah, I was gonna ask what happens when you get a bingo of everyone all together at the same time. Reality will break.
Do you ever get like little parties with, hey, we're all going to be at this convention, let's at least get to drink together, or something this with people that I guess there's a lot of people that you've worked with that you've never actually met in real life, and then you meet. Well, I don't know how the past year's been for you. Sorry if.
I've certainly not been meeting people in real life the last year.
Have you been working with new people the past year?
I have been. I've met quite a lot of people. It's sort of part of being a freelancer, really. Just lots of new publications and new opportunities in that realm. But yeah, there's loads of people I've not met in real life who I'm working for at the moment, and it can be quite surreal because you sort of, I guess you instead of a person, you just collate together a mix of videos and emails, right? And you're like, I think that's the person that I know. So yeah.
And a quick musical question: do you like Screamadelica by Primal Scream?
Oh, gosh, I vaguely recall Primal Scream from like the early noughties. I probably, I mean, Screamadelica sounds like a song that I would like, but you know, for legal purposes,
Oh no, it's the
I
entire
cannot commit
album.
either way. It's the album, my God.
Yes, it's the one with I'm not going to do a bad rendition because that's not going to jog your memory and it's just going to embarrass me slightly, and then we'll have this whole thing where you have to say, yeah, I still don't remember this album. And so when you talk about psychedelic rock, yeah, I was just curious, what do you mean by this?
Mostly 60s stuff, a bit of 70s, but also like some of the modern psych that you get now with guys like the Black Angels and Ty Segall and King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, the whole gamut of rock gods. So yeah, hugely into psychedelic, just anything with kind of screaming guitars and whatnot. I'm rather into it. Less so the sort of like trance psychedelic stuff that I remember students that live near me in Brighton playing constantly. No, far too high octane for that. I want people with long hair and screaming guitars from the 60s. Yes.
And if I may ask, so actually let's put this whole discussion on pause. Let us leave it all for the questionably quick questions in just a moment. And let's start off by asking about what are some of your recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. What have you been enjoying in the past week or so? Have you managed to play any games?
Goodness, I mean, the last week, that will be a lie, as it's been a little bit of a busy week. But over the last couple of months, I've been playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons set in Eberron. Have you ever seen that set? And it's a lot of fun.
I played a wee bit of Dungeons and Dragons ages ago, but I've not played it since 3.5, I'm going to admit.
Oh, wow. Gosh. Yeah, so Eberron is kind of like, it's almost like the steampunk setting for Dungeons and Dragons. Okay. So you got Eternal War, you got, like not robots, but kind of robots called Warforged, who are kind of large artificial people who
it's like
do
giant mechanical golems.
Basically. Well, not quite. I believe that Warforged have souls of a sort. So there's lots of theories within the sort of Eberron world about what a Warforged is. But yeah, in essence, they certainly just kind of look like big old metal golems. So who knows? I've also been enjoying playing the Awfully Cheerful engine, which I've been testing out and playing for M Publishing last week or so. So that's been quite fun because I don't really often get a chance to play like more sort of straightforward, simple, less crunchy RPGs. So I'm always kind of like, storytelling RPG. This is at least sort of interesting and unique. That said, though, obviously don't get me wrong, I love crunching through complex RPGs. That's also fun, but it's nice to have the variety. And board games, I am so excited about kind of getting my sack and jab and just heading out to some board game cafes and playing some games with my friends. I mean, I've been playing Lords of Waterdeep and a bunch of other digital board games just on Discord.
So you really are all about the D&D setting. It sounds like if you are playing Dungeons and Lords of Waterdeep.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Lords of Waterdeep. I mean, obviously, I also enjoy the opportunity to betray my friends in that game particularly, but it's
just go onto the building where, haha, you can't go here, denying them wee things. That
absolutely.
Kind of some people say that Eurogames are low on player interaction. Some people say it's a sort of passive-aggressive style of player interaction.
Oh, I mean, we definitely don't do it passive-aggressive. Like, someone will be like, I've got some mercenaries. They're going to you right now, and I've picked you because I dislike you. There you go. Enjoy that.
full on aggressive. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. That's the joy of playing with your friends, is you can just all be your terrible true selves.
Wow. And I guess that is it, like kind of being part of that magic circle where whoever you are, it's forgiven. Like it's hopefully not, even though there might be a bit of bleed and people think, wait a minute, does this mean that that person is really like that? There's going to be the assumption that no, you are, no matter what you're like in this game, you are still a lovely, gentle soul, possibly, maybe. We're not quite sure anymore.
Maybe. But it makes me happy that my actions in the game cause them to wonder that is this the real Sara, or are they in fact this sadistic monster that has sent mercenaries to my base and enjoyed it? Who knows? I think it keeps the mystery alive.
I mean, this kind of goes in with the whole notion of D&D and identity. Like, do you think that it really is unique to D&D, or is it like something that comes out in pretty much any game once you've given yourself the permission to do things that you might not feel okay doing in real life, if you see what I mean?
Oh yeah, I totally agree, and that's a really interesting point. Like, it's all, I think that ultimately it's all like, and this is going to sound a bit pretentious, but it's all like play, isn't it? It's all within the remit of like playing, and therefore playing means in a sense that you've got kind of like a boundaried space where you can let go, right? I mean, I don't know what the actual definition of play is, but that's kind of what I assume it is. It's like something that's different from the kind of stringent day-to-day reality of how things are run. Sort of in the way that perhaps in real life a kind of parallel might be something like a carnival, and the carnival is there for that day and everything exists within the context of the rules for that carnival for that day. I don't know if I make any sense, but yeah, that's...
I mean, I've been pondering this a lot recently, like the nature of games and play, and so far I feel like a game to me has 3 vital components, and play has 2 of them. And I'm not saying that play is worse than games, and I try to talk at length how play can be better in a lot of ways. But to me, play has agency, as in once you're doing it, it's something that you have some control of. You feel some agency. It's not like watching a film, unless you're like, okay, I'm going to tap beats to the music of this film, then that becomes play, but that's play centered around and on it. So there needs to be some sort of meaningful interaction, and whether that's meaningful depends, of course, on the player. And I very much believe that what is play, or what is a game, is up to the individual who's doing the playing or the game playing. And the second thing, which I think is the most important thing, and it would almost be better if there were more of this in every aspect of our lives, is the freedom to opt in and opt out. So and it gets me thinking about, sorry to go off on a wild tangent, but UBI, how if we had UBI, then being able to opt in and opt out of other activities, those would put those more on the playful, joyful end of the spectrum. But then, of course, for games, I think the third ingredient that it requires is some sort of clarity of rules to say, this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do. And play is almost like you're maybe continually, within a moment, if you really looked at it, you might have some vague rules in your head, but I think that for it to be a game, there has to be some clarity of rules that you've consciously accepted, not just subconsciously, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think it's almost like the rules are like the boundaries in this sense. They're in agreement with like other players about what you can and won't do. And that's not only important for safety, but it's also like it's what defines it, right? Like the rules turn it from you like singing along as you watch TV to you being like, these are the things that I can and can't do. It sets up a context for everything, right? Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I hadn't actually considered that before in the context of something like universal basic income, which, funny enough, it looks like, and I'm hoping that it looks like they might be trialing this like near where I'm living.
Oh, wow.
Like because I'm out in Wales. I'm just out in the I'm out in the countryside, literally in the farm. And I believe that the Welsh government wants to try UBI, so that would be really cool. Like, I hope that they go through with it, they trial it, and then hopefully it will come into the UK, although I feel that the government here might not be so up for UBI for their own reasons. I don't know, just not implying anything there, but Yeah, so it is like with society, it does exist in that place where we can't opt in and out of it really, because everything runs on rules that we don't necessarily consent to, I suppose. They're just kind of given there at the start. So yeah, it's a really interesting comparison between those two things. I've never really looped those concepts together.
Yeah, the notion of consent is a really nice way to put it. And if anyone's wondering, my recent events are that right now there was really bad internet actually until about half an hour ago. So literally 9 o'clock, I wasn't able to get online. I was tethering to my phone, but since 9:40, it's been like, hey, after I came back from my walk, it seems to be fixed. So fingers crossed it stays fine. But yesterday, even though the internet was the worst it's ever been, I was somehow doing a wee bit of prototyping on a game about ghost schools. So it's a game where you are a ghost, you go to school to learn how to scare people, and you kind of move around, you play cards, and then they move around, and then you leave your ectoplasm around, and then once you leave school, not forever, just for the day or whatever, then all your ectoplasm gains this knowledge, because that's the way that ghosts work, in case you didn't know, clearly. And then once you've gained these skills, then you can go off and scare people, and then the people you scare, you flip those cards, and then they become new cards that you can use in your deck to go around the school more efficiently. That's my vague idea. And I was kind of playing it and trying it out. And then also I had a lovely day, and a quick hello to Timmy. Thank you for joining us. But I had a lovely, lovely day seeing Dave Weatherall and Rob Kunzman outside. We had a sandwich and some cheap goodies, and yeah, we hung around and we talked for an hour and a bit, and that was just lovely. And so yeah. And hello to Peebles. Thank you for joining us for this chat. And you're just in time if you want to ask us any questionably quick questions.
Woo.
First, what is the time and where are you? Sorry, Sarah. What is the time and where are you?
Oh my goodness! I'm sorry. I thought you were asking that of Peebles.
But
no,
for everyone else can comment as well. And so, for example, Timmy is in Nova Scotia, and Timmy likes to give us and 6:17 a.m. Peebles is in Kent, where it is 10:18.
I'm over in Newtown, in Powys, and I'm it's 10:18 over here.
And I am in North London, near Finsbury Park, and it is also 10:18 because the UK shares one single time zone, as does Ireland. So the next questionably quick question: what are some of your favourite board games that you would consider board games? What is a board game to you? Do you include cards games? But I'm specifically excluding RPGs just for the moment.
My favorite board games. Well, as I was saying earlier, I do love a bit of Lords of Waterdeep. I do enjoy subterfuge and building and plotting. Therefore, I do enjoy Lords of Waterdeep. I got really quite disturbingly addicted to the digital version of Ticket to Ride for a couple of months. Like, I was literally going to sleep and I could just hear the theme tune in my head with the sort of like little like woo woo, like going in for the honk honk, and I'd just be waking up in a cold sweat being like, yes, more tiles, put them all together. So there's quite a lot of games I like. Those are games that I played recently because to me, playing with my friends is quite important. Like, I do play solo board games a bit, but I very much like the kind of social experience. I've not yet like properly played a game by myself yet, which is something that I really should have learned to do in the pandemic. And I do have numerous solo games, but yeah, like I said, last couple of months has been Ticket to Ride, Lords of Waterdeep, Catan as well, which I've played on those rare instances where, like, you know, you can suddenly go and see people outside. Yeah.
Do you drive a hard bargain? Like, will you just say, okay, if you're not going to give me 2 resources for my 1 resource, I'm just not going to trade with you?
I mean, it can get a bit dicey. It can get a bit competitive. I think the last time I played it with some people, we all decided that we were going to be different factions of Wasp. This was just something that we just like threw in on top of it. It was because at the time, like, our house had been invaded by wasps, and there was just a running joke that about wasps, because what can you do with difficult things except make stupid jokes about them? So it's like we could get very like quite sulky and quite like, well, fine then, if you don't want to give me anything, then you can go away, like that sort of thing, but only as the Wasp kingdoms and obviously the rich lore of the expanded Wasp universe. So
Wow.
yeah.
So by adopting a new persona, you are free to be a bit waspish and tell people to buzz off.
Yes, essentially. Yeah, in those terms. And obviously, you could be like, I've got this, you can't have it, it's for the queen, and so on. You really got into that sort of mindset with it.
I love the randomness of this question. Do you like Vicks Vaporub? I have no emotions towards Vicks Vaporub personally. I don't know if I've ever used it in my life. True story. How about you, Sarah?
I mean, I feel like it's a pretty handy concoction. I've used it before when I've had a bit of a cough. So, I respect it. I think that it's got its uses. I'm not sure why Timmy needs to know why I like Vicks Vaporub.
Hey, why not? I mean, it's not a need to know. It's just a want to know, curious, marginally curious. And Timmy apparently has got some right now.
Oh, wow.
So
I'm starting to wonder if there's like recreational purposes for Vicks Vaporub that I've not previously like considered. Like
I mean,
I'm
maybe Timmy's just a wee bit under the weather, and it helps with my sinus passages, says Timmy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
yeah, purely medicinal. And Designer Cardboard says, and hello, Designer Cardboard says, I prefer Tiger Balm.
Tiger Balm is also a classic one. Do you prefer red or white Tiger Balm?
Is there a difference? What?
There is.
I'm not familiar with Tiger Balm at all. What? So this is another thing that you rub on your outer skin, and it's meant to help you breathe better?
So there's two types. You got white Tiger Balm, which is kind of like mentally, and you use it for cooling. So when I used to live in Southeast Asia, I used to use white Tiger Balm constantly because mosquitoes love me. Like, I'm one of those people that just gets eaten alive by mosquitoes. So you put
so white Tiger Balm is anti-mosquito repellent?
Not anti-mosquito. It's more like it's cooling. So when your skin kind of is bitten or inflamed, you rub it on, and it stops you scratching it, which is really handy because I'm one of those people that really claws at themselves all the time. And the red one.
This is really useful information because I am going to emigrate to Thailand, and mosquitoes will love me.
Yeah, nice. Thailand is very cool. And the red stuff, super heated, and you basically just use it as kind of like a warm muscle balm. So yeah, I always thought white for bites and red for aches.
I think that the only thing I've actually touched an open can of is Deep Heat, which is the same sort of thing as it sounds like the red Tiger Balm. But so my next question is, and I guess you're a bit biased about the Awfully Cheerful Engine, but what are some of your favorite RPGs?
Favorite RPGs?
And you're allowed to express your bias quickly if you want.
I'm a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons. I've been playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, I'm more like dice than person at this point. It's I don't know what happened, but like, yeah, there's so D&D. I just play so much of it in so many different settings with different people. And yeah, I mean, aside obviously from the Awfully Cheerful Engine, an excellent little short sort of RPG, it's been Dungeons and Dragons for the last year. There's so many more RPGs I want to play as well, like so many, but then I have so many that are D&D. It's a case of just kind of waiting and getting round to it. But my friend bought me the Call of Cthulhu starter set for my birthday earlier this year. And I'm constantly looking at that and just being like, yeah, I need to do something with you. And
Had you not played it
something out.
before?
I have played Call of Cthulhu, but I've never like been the keeper. I've never DM'd it. So I would like to do that. And I've got some kind of ideas with that. I'm also really like, I've not played it and I don't own it, but I'm really intrigued by Symborum. Have you seen that?
I have not seen this one.
So it's
I was going to do a quick Google.
Yeah, go for it. It's by Freya Lagan, who do a lot of cool like free league publishing. So they do like Mutant Year Zero and a bunch of other interesting. I believe. Wait, is it Freya Lagan? This is where I just like totally put my foot in my mouth. I'm like, it's a Symborum. It's them, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, it is. It is free league. I'm very curious about Symborum just because it's going for a bit more of a kind of dark folkloric fantasy world, and I just think the artwork is really incredible. And I'm a real big fan of. Do you ever play video games?
Yeah, from time to time, absolutely.
It's got that kind of like, obviously Dark Souls is quite a loose comparison, but it is very much this sort of quite a dark and lonely and strange world. That's quite mysterious.
Just looking at this off Modiphius's website, it looks like a very dark cover, I might say. Honestly, like the colors there are a wee bit muddy, if I was being unkind. I'm not really, I mean, the figure on the background, I guess that's what they want, for you to just be, okay, what's going on? I'm going to gaze a bit more. Oh, there's two figures. Now I see, okay, there's other figures going on. But I think I'm a bigger, again, this comes into personal taste so much, but I don't know, what's that old pointy clicky real-time American RPG on the computer? The third edition, Diablo 3. Then they made it all more colorful, and it was kind of, yes, it's still dark, but it has these purples and all these colors, and it's just a bit more vibrant. It's easier to see. But, that's just my looking at the cover, my review of the cover. Because when I put an image on screen that I'm not sure, am I allowed to show that? Well, as long as I review the art, it's okay. It's like Bloodborne says to me. Would you agree with that?
Oh, goodness. I mean, Bloodborne is very much the same thing, isn't it? Much like Dark Souls. But no, I think Bloodborne goes through a bit more of a kind of like, here's the cosmic horror city, and you've got kind of like the grander conspiracy about it. Whereas Symborum, for what I get, I think that I've heard it kind of described as thematically like a bit more like a darker and kind of grimier Witcher. So, you've got the dark world, you've got the old haunted forest, it all kind of goes through with that. There's lots of ruins and strange creatures. And like The Witcher, it doesn't move from like Eastern European folklore, but it still comes in from that very creepy style of like generally European folklore.
I think there's something lovely about this folklore, now you mention it. I don't know if you are super familiar with Magic the Gathering and the Shadowmoor sets, Lorwyn, that they did. Are you familiar with that?
I love Magic the Gathering. I play a lot of it, but I don't know about the recent, what was it, Shadow of the Moon set?
No. This is quite a bit of time ago. So Lorwyn and Shadowmoor, it was all based on Celtic mythology. So you had like little fays and changelings and stuff. And Lorwyn, I think it was Lorwyn and Morningtide. This was back when they used to do 3 sets a year that were all connected. But then they moved on to 2 and 2, and now they've got like just some number of sets. They don't even need to connect. It's all just boom, 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 all totally separate. So 2 of them were about the creature types, and like the 2 of them did it, okay, we're going to flip everything, now make it a wee bit dark, now it's going to be scarecrows, and a wee bit of changing the mythology. But I think fundamentally what I wanted to say is that when you tap into old mythologies, whether it's Celtic mythology, Japanese mythology, as any culture, there's thousands of years of essentially evolution. Like there's thousands of years of survival of the best stories, of kind of, okay, what are the most interesting creatures? What are the best things? And so why not tap into that? And I think that's such a lovely thing to do. Designer says, isn't The Witcher based on Slavic stuff?
Yeah. Yes, based on Eastern European mythology, which I believe, whereas I believe Symborum draws more from kind of Central European.
But you can definitely see the thing. So thank you for telling us about a wee bit about those few things. And let's move on to our regularly scheduled brilliant thing. Brilliant thing. What's a little thing which is brilliant? And do you have a particular brilliant thing, or should we talk about Dungeons and Dragons for a couple of minutes?
Well, let's see. A brilliant thing. I was thinking about this. I was like, what is a brilliant thing? And I was thinking that a thing that is very brilliant to me is watching my gooseberry bush grow, which is outside. I couldn't bring it in, but I've never. And I promise that's not a euphemism for something weird.
No.
But I've
honestly, you bring it up makes it more weird. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I recently moved out to the country. Have a garden for the very first time ever that isn't just sort of a slab of concrete with a more concrete surrounding it. So I have been growing things which I've not done before. That's been exciting. Obviously, a lot of things have died, but some things have survived. And the main thing that survived is the gooseberry bush, which I planted and I bought, and it was a tiny twig. Essentially, it looked really sad, and I planted it, with my own hands, and it's been growing, and now 9 months later, it is flourishing, and it's huge, and it's nice. Like it's actually a shrub. Like it's got leaves, and it's voluminous, and it's wonderful. And soon there will be berries on it, and I will have actually grown food. So
fingers crossed.
That is a brilliant thing. I've called him Captain Gooseberry. And that is the gooseberry bush, and it really gives me a lot of joy to just go past it every day and be like, I grew you, and soon you will have delicious food on you.
I think that seeing things growing is just such a brilliant thing. I've also got two little things. We are really blessed because even though I live, let's say about 10 miles, and I try not to give people enough information to triangulate exactly where I am, but let's be honest, if you really wanted to spend days searching for a person on the streets wearing lots of red, you'd probably be able to find me. But anyway, I'm about 10 miles from the center of town, by which I mean like the river, the financial district, London Bridge. I'm about 10 miles from there. But I am able to have a garden. We have a garden, and then the cats from next door come in and play, and also the cats from somewhere else that I don't know. And we have a pear tree that gives us, these terrible pears every couple of years. And I grew two things. I planted two things like yourself. One of them was a bush that's meant to start giving flowers. It's never given flowers yet, but I planted it early last year. The other thing I planted was an alpine raspberry bush. Wow. So last year it gave me 3 raspberries, and I was very excited because I was expecting to have to wait a while for it. This year it hasn't given us anything so far, so we'll see how it goes. But it has grown very big, and I've seen some flowers. So I'm like, maybe I should investigate. Do I pluck these flowers to stop it flowering so that it grows fruits, or do I leave the flowers because we need the flowers to pollinate before the fruits come? I'm not sure.
But it's confusing, isn't it?
I am very excited, and Designer Cardboard shares that love. And of course, Timmy, always with the sugary drinks. You've got to watch out for that. Sorry, that sounds like I'm making a bad judgment. But hopefully you can find brilliance in other things that are not orange pop.
And orange pop is very good. I'm a big fan of fizzy drinks, which I don't grow myself. If I could find a way, though, I would create an orange pop crop field.
So I know some people like kind of do things with beer. Have you ever considered like making your own? Did you ever have one of those, the aqua fizzy things? You know the things I mean? That's not what it's called.
Yeah.
We've
got one of Soda Stream. Yeah, my partner and I are like firm Soda Stream people. So we use our Soda Stream and we have fizzy water every day. It's lovely.
So basically, for those who don't know, Soda Stream is a way of carbonating literally anything you want.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever tried carbonating tea?
Oh, no. And the reason why is because I had fizzy tea in Malaysia and it was very unpleasant. So it's you can get it in cans over there, just cans of fizzy tea.
I'm just thinking I would spend if I had if a Soda Stream, like if someone for a gift came into our house and installed a Soda Stream, I was like, okay, here's how it works, and I would spend a day just thinking, okay, what can I carbonate? Let's try carbonated milk. It'll probably be terrible, but let's try it. Let's do actual fresh orange juice, but with carbonation. It'll probably be terrible, but let's try it. Let's try carbonated herbal tea. Let's try carbonated. The herbal tea might actually be okay. Let's try coffee. Yeah. Anyway. So, of course, it has come time for the main topic, and to everyone out there, feel free to continue commenting, asking questions, follow, all that stuff. And it does remind me that I should, if you want to check out a wee bit more about Sarah, please check out those links that I've just shared. So, let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons and identities. Can I ask you to introduce the topic? Why is this a thing close to your heart?
It's a thing close to my heart because I think that playing a lot of D&D helped me with my own identity. And I've seen it with friends where it's created a kind of safe space that's allowed for a lot of discovery. And so I really enjoy D&D specifically for that. Like, I believe that any kind of tabletop RPG would allow a similar experience, but D&D has been the one for me for the last few years, as it's the one that we all play. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the topic, and I'm generally just very fascinated with liminal spaces, I suppose, places where I guess the shadow and the consciousness meet, and where you can actually kind of see divergence with that, and I suppose that you can see your own dark parts, you can see other dark parts, and I'm always, just a big fan of Jung, and a big fan of just things that are hidden and revealed in a kind of vaguely esoteric way.
And we've got Timmy, who's never actually tried Dungeons and Dragons. Mm-hmm. So if someone's never tried it, before we move on, what tips would you give to someone who's coming into the world, who's just maybe a wee bit intimidated, maybe doesn't live close to anyone else who's playing these games?
I would say that if you'd really like to start playing D&D and that you're unable to find a group in your local area, you can find groups online through Roll20 and Discord. There are large online communities that can facilitate that. And I would say just get playing. Keep an open mind, but also, keep your own boundaries, especially if you are playing with strangers on the internet. Good luck if that is kind of an experience that you're going for. And honestly, I think it's kind of one of those things where if you research it too much, you just become incredibly intimidated. Like, I remember the first time I sort of came across D&D rules, I was just like, what is this? What does this mean? Why? I don't understand. So yeah, just go in there, create a character that is meaningful to you. Often, like, I find that people usually base them off of archetypes of like a film character that they like or a TV character that they like, and just kind of see where you go with it, and know that the character will develop like the character will develop kind of as you develop. So you might have a concept, but a year later that concept may have evolved into something quite different.
And one interesting thing that you reminded everyone of is that you don't need to know all the rules. You don't need to know if you are playing a rogue, you don't need to know any of the rules for magic. You don't need, and even if you're playing a rogue, you don't necessarily need to know every single rule for every situation that your rogue can encounter. It's okay if you admit, hey, I'm obviously inform the other person, and I think we've already used the word consent, and that, like, yeah, it is kind of all about informed consent. Like, tell the other peeps, hey, I am a bit new to this, but I want to play roughly this kind of thing. Can anyone help me? And I'm sure there will be so many people who be like, hey, fresh blood, we get to bring you into our world. And so, yeah, Timmy, roll20.net if you want to check it out. Now, there's some elements of, you talked about using these worlds as a safe haven for youth outreach and prison programs. Have you been involved in those sorts of things personally?
Oh my goodness, no! I would very much like to get involved. I've read a lot of articles about how these kind of strange tales where D&D gets banned in prison because people are rolling dice and they assume that they're gambling. But actually, just the way in which D&D can provide such an escape, I think, for people, like a way beyond kind of like their current reality. And I think that, in the instance of people who've been incarcerated, like that must be a really, really powerful thing. So I also, although I'm not directly involved with it, my partner works in the third sector. And she has been sort of organizing basically youth outreach based on D&D groups, which I also think is a really interesting area. And I've seen that cropping up more generally as D&D becomes more prevalent within kind of charities where, people set up D&D groups effectively to help like disadvantaged children and teenagers and things like that. And I think that especially in those spaces where you're looking at people who are vulnerable, and who also might be having like a difficult time, I think that D&D and imaginary worlds like can really provide like a sense of respite and also confidence, I think, because your character is like an extension of you, and when you're able to do powerful things with your character, but also even just the fact that, most of the time when you're playing, or at least every time I play D&D, there's always been this sense that you are part of the party and that the party looks out for you. Even when our characters are just the most heinous sociopaths you can imagine, like there is still this kind of like loyalty within the party that comes in with that mutual respect of we are all in this together and we are doing like a thing together. And as that goes on as well, the way you build up an imaginary history with the other, well, it's not imaginary, it's real in the context of D&D with the other characters. And I think that is actually really good for confidence. And I think that it helps people feel like they belong. And that's certainly something that D&D helped me with, is the feeling that I kind of belong and am seen. So yeah, it was amazing for me in that regard.
That makes lots of sense. Oh, a quick hello to Dutch Yoda. Thank you for joining us as always. It's lovely to see you. Over in Lelystad in Netherlands. So, yeah, what do we say? Of course, I always say, don't say Dutch Yoda, say Netherlands or Yoda, because English is messed up. But let's ignore that whole thing. Yeah, I think what you're talking about there's this sense of innate forgiveness. There's this sense of innate group bonding and approval within D&D, because you have to work together. You have to, and as players, okay, this person might be even, chaotic neutral and sometimes do evil acts, and someone else might be lawful good, which is, of course, these are very simplified ways to approximate the spectrum of how beings do actually behave. But at the same time, it kind of illustrates the point that you can have people who are different getting on. and maybe it gives us a sense of hope for being reintroduced to society and being able to be parts of society again. Now, you talked about, and I have to admit, I had to look up the liminal, what that actually meant. So when we've got things that are making the things that are on the boundaries of our consciousness and making them into the forefront, is there a risk of, sort of encouraging bad behavior? And by allowing it in the game, is there a risk of saying this is okay in real life?
This is like a bit of a, well, I say an age-old argument, like video games haven't been around since like the dawn of time. But this is, this is an argument that often comes up with video games and board games. And I think that it is a reasonable concern, which is that surely sort of doing things that are perhaps a bit darker or be like less acceptable in this imaginary space could almost sort of prime you to do them more in real life, or could kind of encourage you within that. I think that it's a matter of opinion, like an experience with that. So obviously anything that I say regarding that is completely from my opinion. So I respect anyone who, believes differently or may have experienced differently. For me, I believe that actually stuff is much more dangerous when it's pushed down. I think that putting things into the light and giving them an expression, for whatever reason, providing that obviously everyone feels safe with that expression and that it doesn't hurt anyone in that way. I think that is much better than hiding something or not exploring it, because I think that things that you repress have a way of coming out in an unexpected fashion, whereas actually releasing them within a controlled and safe environment and allowing you to kind of work through the feelings and kind of urges that might be associated with those without those consequences, I think for some people probably is better than just not exploring those things at all. But it's quite a contentious kind of thing, and I think that there's lots of different perspectives regarding that.
I mean, I think what we can all agree on is that it can provide a worthwhile part of introspection, of exploring who we are, of seeing Vampire the Masquerade Masquerade. Sorry, I'm forgetting how to pronounce that word. But when we were playing that, we were humans pretending we were vampires, pretending we were humans, and playing that as a LARP. And I wanted to be one of the bourgeois because I thought it would be interesting to express more violent, aggressive parts of myself, because I wanted to be someone as different from my real persona as I could. And the ability to behave a certain way, it doesn't mean I mean, we are preaching to the converted. Frankly, anyone who's watching this isn't going to be thinking, oh my gosh, D&D, what a terrible satanic thing. It's going to turn everyone into demons. Like, I think there was the outcry in the late 80s, early 90s. And, with that, who was it? Tom Hanks film?
Oh, I've seen that film, Mazes and Monsters. That film was great. One of my favorite things about it is that like they appear to just be playing the most like pretentious 70s D&D ever. It's properly like, forsooth, we have a quest, and it just goes on and on. And I watched it with my D&D group, and we were just like, we don't play D&D like that. Like, this doesn't look like D&D.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's like, something, it's clearly badly researched. It makes absolutely no sense. But if you read a book based on the true story that the film is based on, like there is a book by the actual private investigator who was part of that. And it's a really interesting book where it was like, this was a really unstable child. And maybe and it doesn't say that D&D was good. It doesn't say that D&D was bad. Like, the film kind of clearly, strongly implies with the, oh, I'm going to slay the dragon wandering around
on the
New
train
York.
tracks.
But it is a really good book. But Designer Cardboard says, I think as humans, through our shared histories and psyches, we all have this dark side that fascinates us. And it's healthy to explore it in a safe manner. We even do it comedically through stuff like the black comedy genre.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is an interesting thing. Like, if we aren't willing to accept these parts of ourselves, is it going to make us snap at some point? I don't know.
Well, I don't even think that it's like anything as dramatic as like if you don't explore your sort of repressed desires or explore things beyond kind of what you're used to, that, you know, you'll sort of just snap. Like, I think it's much more of a kind of whimper over a bang kind of situation where I think that day to day, a lot of us just repress really large parts of ourselves, you know, not even like consciously necessarily, it could be from like your childhood, it could be from like perceptions that you've kind of picked up, but it's incredible the ways in which we can kind of beat ourselves up and repress things that are actually like not harmful, and the sort of things that we deny to ourselves as well. Like, I remember I've been queer like my entire life, but I didn't even realize that I was queer until like I was in my mid-20s. And prior to that, it was all just stuff down. Don't think about it. Don't just kind of like move through it. And I think all of us have so many things like that, whether it linked to our identity or our memories, or even just, there's the concept sort of within psychology of disowned parts of yourself, the parts of you that you effectively had to kill and repress in order to do whatever it was that you felt you needed to do, and I think that it's really important, like, to be on board with our subconscious, because our subconscious is there. And if it's not expressed like day to day, then it's still churning away. It's just not finding an outlet. And it's like trying to hold a flood with a fingertip. Like, everything's building up and eventually it will come out in some way or another.
And it might never come out, but I do think that by acknowledging these things, it does mean that we are maybe... It's one of those things like, going through therapy can be really difficult, and it's kind of like opening up all these wounds. It's like you're figuratively re-breaking a bone in order to have it set in a better position. And understanding your own shortcomings, being aware of these things, I think that's introspection, as long as you have the energy for it, is always a useful thing. And that's my strong belief.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's very... I'm not saying that, like, we should all be kind of embracing our dark parts and doing like very, really hard personal exploration. Like, I do agree that is a useful thing to do. But at the same time, the most important thing to do with anything is to make sure that you're in a safe place and that you feel regulated and that you're not forcing yourself to kind of look at things that you necessarily like can't cope with because, you feel that you have to do so in order to get better. And I think that in some ways, the fact that D&D is in of itself just a very casual, like quite a casual thing, a kind of imaginary world. Our DM always says that like it's like D&D is like therapy because we've just got our little darkest parts out. We're all playing, we're all killing people and doing terrible things, and we're quite But to be honest, I don't think I've ever met a D&D party that is like good. Even the what like because people generally, in those circumstances where you can do anything, will do wild stuff. It'll be, you got a fireball, you're going to use it, right? you might not use it to burn down the villagers, but you're certainly going to use it to kill the villain, right? There's always something kind of with that. So yeah, I think that exploring is really important, but I also think that it's really interesting, but people are often like, the shadow, the subconscious is bad. It's all your repressed stuff. It's all the stuff that you want to put away. But actually, there is a lot of light within the shadow. There is a lot of light, and there is a lot of kind of wonder within the things that we have put away.
think I would like to talk a wee bit about safety, which you brought up very briefly there.
Mhm.
And Stream Elements reminds us, well, you can feel free to join in or not if you want, kind of get up and do a wee bit of stretching in whatever manner you please. And if you're out there painting miniatures like Mark Peebles or just watching like some other folk, then feel free to stretch or not. It is up to you. Take care of your body. But in any case, what are the safety risks? What do we mean by this when we talk about it? And what safety mechanisms can we implement?
So safety risks, I would say anything that can make someone feel uncomfortable, unwanted, threatened, triggered, as if they're invalid, as if their sort of experience, hasn't been considered. And I think that often one of the biggest safety risks in D&D can just be kind of, I suppose, people like stomping over other people to do their thing is quite a big one, and that can be very difficult for people. And I've had it before, kind of just in my years of like being in D&D groups and kind of like organizing with that, where, you know, it's been a case of there have been times where people have felt, actually, you know, I felt that you didn't take my opinion into consideration when you did this thing, and I felt stomped over and I didn't really feel seen. And everyone's like, oh God, like, you know, really sorry. Actually, you know, we were just being excited and reckless and inconsiderate, and we're really sorry and we'll not do that again. Like, there's a lot of things like that, I think, that can happen. And I think that the most important thing with that is that everyone feels safe enough to discuss it with the DM and the rest of the group. Like that is how you kind of mitigate, I think, is that you make mistakes and then you learn as a group like how to resolve them. And I think also like giving people the benefit of the doubt. I think that like 99.99% of the time people are just being silly, or they're just like not really thinking, or they're being a bit reckless rather than they're kind of like intentionally trying to hurt someone. And I think that having that kind of attitude as well helps things get resolved, because you're not kind of blaming anyone. You're not trying to like, it's very much coming from a place of I think and I feel, rather than you did said thing. I think as well for the DM to basically have a very like, I suppose an open table where, so for example, a good example of this is that one campaign that I play, no one really likes anything that's kind of sexual, like not even like flirting with NPCs. Like we're just a very asexual group overall. And you know that was something that was sort of discussed when we started, as everyone was like, I would not be comfortable if I flirted with an NPC, or, you know, so like an NPC made advances toward me, or that there was a romance subplot. Like that's sort of not what this campaign is about. And again, that's just community communication, transparency, and just letting people know kind of what you want and what you don't want, and also letting them know if something makes you uncomfortable. You know, even if you're unable to do so at the time, you know, you can always speak to people afterwards and be like, actually, this made me uncomfortable. Like, let's avoid this in the future, you know?
Of course, for people who want to hear more about this on YouTube, you'll be able to find the episodes where I talked with Lolvi for a couple of hours just about safety techniques in LARPs and role-playing games. But a lot of it, whether it's the X card or whether it's, you know, talking about things up front, it all comes down to communication. It all comes down to being informed and being able to give your consent, but being able to keep that surprise somehow, because stories are about surprises to some degree. And you don't want to be able to say, and you don't want to be able to stop. Well, you want to be able to, but you don't want to have to stop everything in the middle. So that's where talking about things ahead of time kind of comes up. And so is it basically just being better at communicating? And are these safety mechanisms then things that could apply to our real life? Like to encourage us to be better communicators?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have learned a lot about communication through D&D. it definitely leveled up my communication, kind of helping a group run, essentially, because conflicts do come up, and you work out a way to organize those conflicts in a way that like gives everyone equal breathing room, and also is like public, transparent. You're not kind of like trying to conspire with one person against like another person trying to fix it up. You're like, nope, this is the group and this is a situation for the group, and we're all going to discuss this. It also does really help as well that all the DMs I've had have been, very sensitive, kind of like to just general like racial and identity issues. Like I've never had a DM that's like, we've got orcs and we're going to make them really stupid because why would one species be stupid? It's stuff like that. Like I think there is also certainly like a level of oversight that the DM has, and a responsibility within that. Like it's not entirely on the group. But I think that, anyone who is kind of reasonably sensible and not just like an outrageous, like, racist or sexist or whatever, will kind of put these things into consideration. And also that if they were to kind of like slip up in some way through their own blind spot, you've kind of got this trusting mechanism where the group is able to. So yeah, again, just all communication, we all help each other, make each other feel safe and have fun.
Do you think that, the nurturing benefits of RPGs are intrinsic? Or do you think we have to play in any specific mindful way? Is it just an inherent side effect that's always going to come about?
That's a really interesting question. Is it an intrinsic, like, are the benefits intrinsic? I think that obviously it's very much based on the group that you're playing with. I have had some bad experiences playing D&D that certainly kind of didn't have like benefits, for whatever reason, sort of differing reasons based on, first things first, if you don't have an especially good DM who can't design a particularly good like campaign or module, people aren't going to be engaged with that, so they're not going to interact, and there's not going to be any of those kind of benefits. You can also get DMs who just like, it's almost as if they're really treating it as they are playing against you and they are trying to kill you, and they like, and that can be fun. Like that is fun in a way, but when that becomes all that the DM is trying to do and they're kind of pulling strange rules, and I've had that experience before. Like again, people get sort of bogged down, and they can't really express themselves. Like it's very important, I think, for the DM to maintain an atmosphere that encourages safety, but also play and fun and
like
interactivity.
Making space for people, not just here's a story, but making space for other people to have a wee bit of input. And like those two things, what you're talking about, is basically hand in hand with just good role playing, like kind of making it an engaging game. And it sounds like what you're talking about is, as long as it is an actually engaging game, then you do get these benefits of playing make-believe and exploring what's going on and what you might want to do, what this alternate persona might want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so much of that is down to the DM. They kind of they're bringing everything to the table, so to speak. So, but I know you could have it, but then to be fair, you could have a DM who has quite like, say, a shoddily designed module. Maybe they're just starting out, they don't really understand principles of game design for whatever reason. They're kind of their game isn't very interactive. But then if that DM even just creates an atmosphere, and I would say as well, I have been that DM. Like I remember like some of the first kind of things I wrote out were just like, oh, this is really bad. Like I don't really, now that I sort of understand some basics of game design, I kind of look at them, I'm like, oh, that's a real cringe. What did I sort of write this up for? But I'm not sort of blowing my own trumpet here, but the sessions that I ran with that material was still fun. And a huge part of that was because the group already knew each other, so there was that intrinsic chemistry. So you could kind of you could give like our D&D groups like a bag of conkers, and they would be like amused by it because we've all just been playing together so long and like kind of like each other. But also there's the fact that regardless of whether like my design was not very good or not, I'm still always a receptive DM to players. Like I'm not sort of like I'm going to sit here and talk for like an hour and a half. So what happened was that basically the players essentially created their own content, like you know how it goes in RPGs, like they just kind of went on their own wild tangent, and that was extremely fun and very kind of collaborative. So I feel that experience is there, but it is ultimately, it's a mix of content and how much, exactly like you said, the DM allows people to have the space to actually express themselves, and also the level of safety that the DM has, because it can really kind of ruin a game if one person is acting up in whatever way, they're being rude, they're saying unpleasant things, they're making, like horrible sort of, I don't know, like inferals and whatnot. Like when that happens, I think it's actually very important for the DM to be like, hey, let's take a moment. Like, can you not like say this or like kind of do this because it's like offensive to these people? It's very much like the DM needs to kind of, it's almost like the DM is the guide, right? He's the guy, that they're the guide to this liminal world that you're coming into, where you're playing with your darkest parts, and the DM is kind of like the adult in the situation. they're like the big parent, like they've created the world, and they're like, we're playing with each other's toys, and that's great, and here are my toys, and I trust you to like treat them awfully because you're a D&D player, but that's the purpose of playing with the toys. But then also, I think that the players, especially people who are like more anxious or people who are like not very experienced with D&D, need to feel that the DM is going to call someone out if they do something problematic, but they're going to do so in a kind way. They're not going to start just like insulting someone or whatever. They're basically that the DM can control the table, and that they can effectively enforce kind of boundaries when people kind of skirt around those sorts of things, I think. So yes, a real mix of stuff.
It's really interesting how you talk about the Dungeon Master or other things, the Games Master being the guide and having that additional responsibility. It does make me think about, even within a more stereotypical board game, sure, there might not be the same level of curation because okay, if I play a Knizia game, it's once I've described the rules, that's it. I don't put any creativity into how we interact with the rules, that's it. But typically, the facilitator, the dungeon master, the narrator, the whatever is inventing worlds, inventing characters to go along with this, trying to keep it as a living, breathing world. And there's a lot of skill, and there's a lot of decision making, not just in terms of, okay, do I block your space, and do I try and be aggressive to you? And I would say that even in Fiasco, a GM-less game, there's a bit more ownership of the narrative of everything that goes on from the players. And so I would say that because these kinds of games are primarily about the expression of the self, because when I think about it, sometimes I feel like there's almost three reasons to play games. Like one is just a trying to win, reason one is the expression of self, and one is the kind of, okay, I'm going to push a few buttons and see what comes into it. But like these are broadly, and I get you've got also the social aspect, but like, I'm still trying to work this out in my own mind. But very much something like Go, chess, backgammon, Taj Mahal, Battleship, Corridor, falls on one end of the spectrum. And then something like Dungeons and Dragons, Fiasco, the Awfully Cheerful Engine, falls on the other side of the spectrum, where it's like, hey, we're just me. And I guess, Rory's Story Cubes would also fall on that same side, where if I wanted to tell you a very problematic story, with these cute little symbols on these dice, talk about, okay, someone went over and, started some, I could start talking about genocide and all sorts of things if I really wanted. But you've got to be mindful because there's a lot more unwritten rules, I would say, in games
Yeah.
about expression. There's a lot more lack of clarity, and that's where being mindful, being empathetic has to come in.
Absolutely. That's really like the crux of all communication, really, isn't it? Just being kind of mindful, empathetic, respectful. But like you say, there is a real trove of these unwritten rules, and I can see like the ways in which it can be like quite difficult when you first start with sort of playing like more of these sort of get games like in sort of like D&D and Fiasco and the Awfully Cheerful Engine, where you are putting like a part of yourself out that's a bit vulnerable, like with a group of people who may or may not be strangers at that time. And yeah, it's actually quite it's weird in that sense. I'd never really thought about it before, but playing games and playing things like D&D is putting a little bit of yourself on the line in a way, if you're playing in a way that's really engaged, where you're exploring parts of yourself. And so it makes sense.
As a board game facilitator, if I teach a game, I think that I only have the same power as a GM if I'm actually creating new rules, which honestly I have done sometimes. I have had times when I've read the rules to a game. Sometimes it's a party game and it's like, you know what, for whatever reason, this won't work for our group. And maybe I'm taking out some of the content. Maybe I'm saying, okay, this parts of it we're not going to play with, or because maybe I don't feel comfortable with that. Maybe I think that other people might be uncomfortable with that. But if you do it in the normal way, that's the thing, that there is more ownership and, as you say, more risk involved.
I would also sorry. I'm just curious about like your sort of experiences as a board game facilitator, but I would actually like argue that although obviously as a board game facilitator, you're not creating a world in the sense that a DM is, you're not turning up with that. Like the way that a board game is facilitated really does make a difference to how people interact with this. And I found this at previous jobs where, essentially, I've been paid to like go to conferences and get people excited about a board game and teach it to them, like that kind of thing. And it really like, it really makes a difference how you explain a game to someone. And I've seen that in my own board game groups. Like it often can set the tone. So like if you're like playful and you're sort of expressing stuff in a certain way, then that's like the attitude people take coming into the game. So I think again, like just any kind of facilitator actually does set the tone. And in that same way as well, like, as you create a safe environment where people feel they can ask you questions about the rules, but not in a way that like interrupts other people, then that's going to really affect how they play the game and how engaged they are with it. Yeah. So it's so many things, but it is like, there is definitely a connection between the two. I've seen good board game facilitators and I've seen bad board game facilitators, and I've seen them completely change the outcomes on like different games, if that makes sense, and how people like engage with them.
Yeah, now you bring it up, there is definitely a lot of parallels that can be drawn about having to tell people what you're getting into ahead of time, especially as we get more emotionally resonant games like Freedom, The Underground Railroads, or Holding On, The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr. And these sorts of experiences, when someone comes, we need to say, this is what you're going to get into. But also just on a pure... on a non-narrative sense, in a sense of, okay, this game is going to take approximately this time. This game is going to be complicated in these particular ways. This is what the game is going to ask of you. And are you okay with that? Because sometimes it's also, how are you playing? Like, are we playing this? And Gil Hova made these check-in cards to remind people to say, okay, how energetic are you feeling? What... and how much do you want to win? And then you kind of, the idea being that you point to a number on a card from 1 to 5 for these two things. And then if there's like a big variance, then you might want to check in with the person who's got so much variance. Because if someone wants to play the most energetic game ever and everyone's a bit tired, then... But this is it. You need to be talking pre-game and also mid-game. Like Michael, the designer of Holding On, Trouble Life of Billy Kerr, has been telling me that we should be willing to abandon games more readily. If it's not working for people, that's basically the open table situation in a role-playing game where you can get up, and making it clear that that is a possibility, almost baking that into the design of a game. As a game designer, how can you design a game so that someone coming into the game can maybe be okay, so that someone leaving the game can maybe be okay, so that it tells people more clearly what's going on? And as a dungeon master, I think that you are partially player, partially rules explainer, partially game designer. There's a lot of stuff that's going on, all wrapped into one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think as well that so I've had it where I've taught a game to people, and I do stupid voices while I'm teaching them because I'm playing a character or whatever, and I sort of I kind of often and this is part of my general work, I suppose, just working in media, but I always treat facilitation as a bit of a bardic pursuit, because you're basically you're not only teaching people, right, you're getting them invested in the game. You're teaching them about it, and you're here are the rules, here are the things, and look, I've noticed that as well. When you're teaching someone how to play a board game, it's all the players look to you to how to play the game, what the tone of the game is. So if you're being really extrovert and you're I am now the wasp queen, this is all good, this is what I'm going to do now, watch me kind of roll the dice, people will kind of match your energy. Not always, it depends how they're feeling on that day, but I do just think it's so interesting the way that in this scenario where we're playing, we're in a liminal space, and we got the parent, and the parent's the facilitator, and the parent's the DM, and they're sort of, I guess everyone is looking to that person to set the tone and then kind of playing within it, but also much like a parent looking to that person to not discipline, but to set the boundaries. This is cool, this isn't cool. Let me know what is cool and what isn't cool.
Now, let's talk a wee bit about Dungeons and Dragons specifically, because we talked about Soulforge, but so lots of what we've been talking about could be applied to pretty much any RPG. Do you think that there is anything inherent to Dungeons and Dragons specifically that makes it good for exploring alternate identities, for introspection, for nurturing environments? Or is that just because, frankly, it was the first one around, and inertia is a thing, and so it is more popular largely because of that, because Hasbro has a lot of money and pays really good. I mean, maybe the fact that Hasbro has a lot of money and continues to be able to pay really good people to work on stuff at Wizards of the Coast does frankly mean that they are able to make better games, because the fact that, sure, having more money, being able to pay more people to do things is going to make it inherently better, but is it? Sorry, that's kind of a loaded question.
It's an interesting one. I do think that D&D is special to me, and I do think that there are some aspects of D&D that do lend itself well to kind of more imaginative play. So for one thing, I think on the spectrum of RPGs, I don't think D&D is very crunchy, compared to say something like Pathfinder, and numerous other kind of RPGs where the mechanical element is actually is a really big part of the game, and you kind of need to digest quite a lot of stuff to play the game properly, and that is the case with D&D. But D&D is also you can just play with a pre-generated character, and as long as you understand the basic mechanism of your stats and dice, which I found that most people, if they played a video game, like say an RPG, kind of understand, and instinctively that I've got 12 in intelligence, and that means that I get a +1 or whatever. They sort of you can kind of, it's quite a familiar setup. But I also,
and if they're high enough, then you do good stuff, eh?
Exactly. Yeah, it's quite that's pretty much it. That's all you need to explain. But I also think that D&D is mechanical, but it's also quite story based. It does allow for a lot of improv. it is very much a game that you can play with people who are not interested necessarily in the strategy aspects of it, not interested in like the battle aspects. They're more interested in developing a character and being that character and improvising with other characters in a kind of like, you know, world that you set up. And simultaneously as well, and this is one of the funniest things I find. So I also love the mechanical aspects of D&D. I'm a huge strategy player. I've had a terrible Civilization 4 addiction for many years now, which then moved on to Civ 5 and now Civ 6. So, you know, I'm very excited when the battle mat and the miniatures come out. It's been about a year since I've seen that, as I've been playing remotely, but you know, I like that aspect. And I think actually what's great about that is I know a lot of people who like that aspect, but didn't think that they liked the improv aspect, right? They were sort of more nerdy about the battles and so on than they were about like, you know, giving their character a backstory or kind of talking. But then the process of doing the thing that they really enjoy, that's really fun with the strategy, open them up to the socializing and the improv. So I quite like that D&D has a bit of a two-pronged approach where you can get someone perhaps who is more naturally introverted, but who, when it comes to making the big plan or like, you know, like figuring out something, is like completely on it, and then they feel valued in like a social way because they're actually in a place where they feel comfortable to contribute. But then also all the other wild extroverts who are less interested perhaps in rolling the dice and more interested in doing silly voices, perfectly legitimate pursuit, can't knock it. Like those people also get kind of an aspect. So I think D&D is quite like the fact that it's quite flexible is like, I think allows it to have quite a broad appeal. And as a result of D&D, friends of mine who are naturally quite introvert, and they've told me this, you know, they've been like, we've been playing a few years now, and like, I'm much more social now. Like I sort of, because, you know, I've, like they say, they're like, I've got, you know, because now it's like, I just play with a group, and that's not really something I do because I'm not really like, you know, a group person. But, you know, here I am, I've got this sense, you know, we've got someone in our party who like, they're quite introverted, but their main thing is that they like being like the weird woods person who can navigate us through like the strange stuff. Like they've really sort of found their place, and that's something that I quite like about that as well. Is that no, because a lot of people used to ask me this at Dice Break. You know, we get like questions in, like what you know, advice on RPGs, and one of the big things was I'm not an extrovert. Like I kind of like I don't really like people that much, but I do want to play like D&D. You know, these are questions kind of coming in. You know, people being like,
okay.
I
thought you were saying that you don't like people. Okay.
No, I like people. Well, sometimes, but like the kind of.
Do you consider yourself an introvert or extrovert or both?
In a difficult fashion with everything, I feel that I'm on like the boundary with it, and I think I'm an ambivert. Like I really that's how it always goes. Like I'm always just like, yeah, it's just like somewhere in between, like fluid. But like, so it's
you
kind
need
of
time on yourself. You also need time with other people, and if you don't have both, then you're just unhappy.
Yeah, like I find that I need like a good mix of personal space where I can sort of sit about doing, you know, my boring kind of nerdy hobbies and just sort of, you know, just decompressing from like stimulation and whatnot. And then, but I also, you know, gain energy from hanging out with people that I like and seeing my friends. So, you know, it's just getting a balance. And I can often go either way. I can be like socializing way too much and feeling exhausted all the time, or I can not socialize enough and just feel exhausted all the time. So it's a fine balance, right? How about yourself?
I would say I tend more towards like I would be happier always having, you know, people around me all the time rather than never being with people at all. Like even if never being around people at all, I could, you know, use the internet. I would still, even though it would kind of be a bit weird, you know, if people were, you know, following me into the bathroom and stuff, I would rather put up with that just to have
just to have like the stimulation with it. So like
have like sometimes when I'm with people and we're able to just have these social contacts. And I mean, this is good, don't get me wrong, but it's not quite the same as if we were sitting ground and then there, I don't know if you agree that there is something that you only get, even if there's no actual physical touching, there's something that you only get if you are sharing the same air, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, absolutely. I really miss seeing people in real life. I miss playing games with them in real life. And, you know, even though we've got a pretty good workaround, like with playing online, I play online a lot with my friends with D&D and board games. Yeah, I think what it is I think that when you are, and this is going to sound like a little bit like, ooh, but I think I think that when you're around people physically in the same space as them, it's like you can pick up their energy. Like there's all this kind of stuff that we've like evolved to like read people and understand them and kind of communicate with them. And I think that all of that stuff triggers when you're actually with a person. You know, you can smell them, you can see them, you can understand their kind of micro expressions, like, and that's all kind of triggering stuff in your brain, right? And like that's what social contact is like. And there is something that you're losing through this digital facade, you know, like.
Yeah, and like thinking, okay, well, like let's not get too sidetracked. But now I'm thinking of like the way that it's narrowed down to this little rectangle. But even if we had, you know, amazing virtual reality, there would be moments when it just doesn't work. Like yesterday, my stream wasn't working. This morning at 8 a.m., my internet wasn't really working properly, and now it is, which is brilliant. But there's always that thing in my head saying it might fail, which it's not a conscious thing, but there's the awareness that I don't know, but going back to the topic, it sounds like it is the innate flexibility in Dungeons and Dragons, which both means that yes, before the game you need to say, what are we all about? Are we wanting to be a bit silly? And the Dungeon Master for sure is going to be the person to set the tone, as you said. Whether that's this true story, spending an entire like 2 hours where one person gets turned into a chicken, and then we chase after, and then they we try and rescue them from an evil cult who's about to put this chicken into soup, and then as we're leaving we notice that there's 2 other chickens, so you have to take all 3 chickens, and then we're going down the road with these 3 chickens, one of whom is our party member, and then suddenly a cart knocks into us with all these chickens, and so we have to buy the entire truckload of chickens, literally.
I call this campaign chickens. Yeah.
But it was just one night. But like, are you open to that sort of silliness? On the other hand, are you open to really deep combats? There was a group that I used to be part of, G3, back when I was in Glasgow, a lovely place where people meet up in Glasgow, Scotland, and I'm sure there's other Glasgows in the world. People meet up, and you have some miniatures players, you have some role-playing people, and I think it's like £3 you play for the renting of, to go towards the renting of the hall, and then any extra money that they have at the end of the year they put towards scenery and stuff. And it's quite nice because you can come with your own food. It's quite cheap, you don't have to buy anything. It's not like going to a bar. So, and you can even pay an annual subscription. I think it was like £7, and then you get to go as many times as you want each week, potentially. But I saw one group who was playing like one fight over multiple weeks. Kind of, sure, if that's what they're into, but for me, that would bore me. And if I unwittingly got myself into that sort of situation, then I would be possibly kicking myself. Probably at this point in my life, I would, once I realized kind of, and maybe at the end of the first session, say, hey, I didn't realize that this would be the kind of game it is. Sorry, this really isn't for me. Is there a way that I could maybe leave and not have it affect the game too much? And but it takes a certain level of confidence to do that, right? And so that's why ideally you want to have that conversation up front, but at the same time, the flexibility that you're talking about with D&D, it might mean that people are able to move and shift from one aspect to another and bring in a bit more of the role playing, or bring in a bit more of the battle strategy, because there is actually a really interesting battle game there if you want it. But at the same time, there is this whole world to explore with all these different races and this potential of, okay, you can do wisdom checks and charisma checks and try and, even though this might not be for your group, you might try to seduce people or use emotional manipulation within your role playing.
Yeah, and you know, some folks are like into that, and that's fine. Like, it's all a game, you know. It's all as long as it's all done. Yeah, I don't like. It's not actually. I've played a lot of D&D, and I play in like 3 different campaigns, and I've not. It's not something that any of my characters ever seem drawn to. Like, I always seem to make quite asexual, non-binary characters. But like, there's a and that's the funny thing as well, is that like before I came out as non-binary, all of my D&D characters were non-binary, and I never even just thought, why do I keep making non-binary characters? Right? I was just like, okay, yeah. I mean, obviously there are they. Like, why wouldn't they be? So there's that aspect to it as well. Like, just with that, but I think that's it. Is the flexibility, and I always like Sam, I was saying earlier, like get people always being like, I want to play D&D, but I'm not an extrovert. So am I going to be good at playing D&D? Is what they say. And I'd always be like, well, you know, it's a cooperative game, so there's not kind of like, you know, the competitive aspect to it. But the truth is that people play D&D for so many different reasons and all enjoy different things. So a good example of this would be there's a couple of people in the group, including me, who often play face characters. So we're not out there seducing the dragons, but we are characters and ourselves. The thing that we like doing the most is interacting with the characters. You know, we like plotting or scheming or entertaining or manipulating, you know, all that kind of stuff within that. But there's a couple of people in the group who have not charismatic characters and who aren't really that interested in talking to NPCs. But those, you know, one of those people loves fights, you know, loves stabbing, loves having a fight, and the other person loves strategy and loves being the introverted, weird character who takes us through the woods and who does all the kind of like mysterious, edgelordy kind of ranger stuff. So I think as you just to sort of like come on that point, I think that's it. Is the flexibility is you don't have to play a certain way. You don't have to go and be the bard and seduce people if you just don't really like talking to people. That I'm sure that there's someone else in the party who will be happy to do that. Yeah, you know, like people, it lets people lead into their strengths, which I think can be a very like good experience for confidence as well.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point, and so is there any game with that same amount of flexibility that you could see being as good?
It's hard to say because I've not played anywhere near as many RPGs as I'd like to. Like, there's so many, and you know, there's a lot of systems that I've not tried. You know, because from what I understand, like the Call of Cthulhu engine, like the Chaos, I cannot remember what it's called, but it has a special name. It's basically an investigation engine. So from what I understand, that engine, like within Call of Cthulhu and kind of games within that remit, like is really, the Yellow King used it as well. God, what is it called? Basically, there's like an engine that is an investigation engine. And it is apparently, from what I understand, if you want to make like a murder mystery or you want to do something that's investigation orientated, that's the engine for you. And that's the engine through which it just lends itself very well through the different kind of statistics and skills and whatnot into an actual investigation. Whereas an investigation in D&D 9 times out of 10 is like, I roll an investigation check. I got a 2. Oh, well, I find out nothing. Like, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that certainly, I'm sure that there are other games that allow that level of flexibility, especially games with the more kind of complex and long-standing engines. But I don't know whether there is one that quite summarizes it up as D&D so well in terms of it being both social, both mechanical, and also strategic. You can play across all 3 of those vectors when you play D&D.
That's really strong accolades. So it sounds like for you, and I think that's the thing to remember, is that as a player, if you know what I really want is to play a game that will be a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe I want to play the sorts of games that are about bereavement and loss. Maybe I really want to play the sorts of games that are about exploring the nature of nostalgia. And once I've reached a point where I'm thinking about that, maybe D&D isn't necessarily the best game. It might be time to start saying, hey, this is what I've decided that I personally enjoy. Are there people who enjoy similar games, and let's play something that's laser focused on that one thing? Because, the nature of, exploring the nature of being a mother, or exploring the nature of being abandoned in this war-torn situation, and the emotional impact it has. Now, as a facilitator, it feels like the strength of D&D is the fact that, in a sense, it is the flexibility, but it's also just I'm trying to, because no one's played these things as much as they would like. Once you enjoy games, it's like, yeah, so many games, so little time. But it feels like also in a way it's quite vanilla. Like, if you D&D, there is a sense of, yes, it's not really going to get into the intense emotion of bereavements. You're not going to have like an entire day focused on that. There is a certain levity of tone.
There's also Yes, I agree. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, no, I completely agree, and I agree that is like not a flaw within D&D, but it's certainly not something that's designed to, like, I think, deal with heavy topics on one level. And one of the biggest things with D&D, and kind of like, not even a complaint is the wrong word, but the problem, a thing that D&D does, which not necessarily a lot of other RPGs do, is it really does place you in a hero position. Like, if we were to kind of look at the politics of D&D, as a character in D&D, you're extremely privileged. You are not you are not subject to, compared to, say, something like Call of Cthulhu, where you are really very weak and the game is full of things that can kill you in one hit. That doesn't really exist in D&D. Like, you could have a monster that kills people in one hit, but that wouldn't really be the spirit of D&D, because the spirit of D&D is that you're a hero and you are going on a quest and you are doing the thing. Whereas the spirit of Call of Cthulhu is that you are a gnat in the grand cosmic scheme of things, and you are a normal person. You're not a hero, and you could get killed very easily. You could trip over and fall and die. Like, that can happen. Similar to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Every time you use magic in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you have to effectively roll on a wild magic table to ensure that a rift doesn't open up and consume you and all of your friends. And that can happen. That can happen in a game. There's lots of games, I suppose, that are much more brutal than D&D, where you are not privileged and you are effectively kind of much more at the mercy of the DM. And D&D is, you get more privileged as well. You get to by the time you're at level 15, which is quite close to the end game, you are basically a god. You can do anything at all, essentially. Especially if you're something like a wizard, like, you can literally create like rifts in reality. So I think that in that sense, D&D does not lend itself well to more heavy topics, because ultimately heavy topics tend to be about, oppression, or something like bereavement, which is just cosmic scale loss. That's something awful that's just happened. You can't go and fight it. You can't go and like get a sword and go, I'm going to go kill.
In a world where you've got reanimation, can you really have true bereavement?
Well, that's it. It's a real fantasy world. I think that it depends on what like level of magic you have in your D&D campaign, and what, because, for example, most of the worlds that I play in, they're high magic, but that magic is not like accessible by your average kind of villager. Like, if you want that sort of magic, you're probably going to have to go and like study it in some form or another, and it's not like completely everywhere, but it is still a magic world, and you are now a privileged person in this world, because if you don't use magic, you're so hench that you can kill people like with a sword or whatever. So it's like, D&D does not make you feel weak, which is good, because that's part of the fun of it, is this escape, that you are this super person and that you can do all these fun stuff. But I think that actually, like, in order to experience something of emotional depth within a game, there needs to perhaps be an experience where you are a bit leveled so that you can relate to kind of what the character is going through to some extent, you know, where you need to, it's very, very hard, I think, to make people kind of feel things or question things when they are a golden god with like a giant axe, you know, like, because they're just going to go and kill the thing with the axe, you know. It's so yeah, I think that is a really interesting point, and that is something that it kind of this really dawned on me actually, because last year I looked at I wrote about a game, I interviewed a game designer about a game called Yangshi Blood in the Banquet Hall. Really interesting game, really like interesting like mechanics, very sort of beautifully designed. I was very fascinated with it. And it can be played kind of on the surface as a game about Chinese immigrants fighting kind of evil like hopping vampires known as Yangshi. But it can also be played as a game that explores racism toward the Chinese immigrant population during the 1920s. And you know, it was like the racism back then was really bad. Like, I didn't really know about it. Like I wasn't even aware that people were effectively segregated into Chinatowns, you know, like things like that by the government and whatnot. And the Yangshi Blood in the Banquet Hall, because it deals with these heavy topics, like it literally has rules on how you play racism in the game. You know, it has rules on like what you do if you're uncomfortable. It has rules that have been sort of looked through via a team of sensitivity consultants to be like, if you do want to have racism in the game, which is a valid part because this game is ultimately about this community who struggled with racism, here is how you do it. And there's real kind of guidelines with it. And the game in of itself, the mechanics of it have been designed around this, around having those experiences, because they're an important part of what the game is about and what it kind of means, even just on a meta level. So I do agree. I think that if you, well, sort of agree, but like I agree that like, I think that if you do want to explore heavier topics, it is perhaps best in a way to do so with a game that has actually been engineered from the ground up to explore those topics, because you know that in that sense, not only has it been explored and kind of directed in a sensitive fashion so that you're not necessarily going to offend or trigger someone, but also those are heavy topics. And again, if you're like a golden god who can like cast fireballs and like hit, like go with a big axe, you're probably not really going to engage necessarily with like a peasant dying in the village, you know what I mean? So yeah, D&D.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, like looking at Magic the Gathering, the other notable Wizards of the Coast game, obviously, you know, one of them originated with the company. Anyway, let's not get into the thing. You know, it is, but Magic the Gathering, they recently, well, 10 years ago with the time spiral block, depowered all the main characters, because it was like, yeah, previously planeswalkers were essentially gods. They can do literally anything. But now, after the time spiral block, this is meant to be a big rift in time, and it's actually, they had to give up part of their power, and things really changed. And now they can actually die. And it's not a big emotional impact. Let's be honest. Magic the Gathering, yeah, it's kind of, okay, cool, we get to go to this world. Okay, cool. But now there's even a smidgen of relatability that's, okay, at least now these characters can die and share some of the same emotions that we do as mere normal humans. And it makes me kind of, leads me to my final question, which is about when you're using this as a facilitator, how can we best use it? A lot of the things we've said about D&D make me realize, okay, D&D, it doesn't ask very much of anyone specifically. It doesn't ask us to necessarily perform. If there's someone who's like really sullen, doesn't want to say anything, they can just roll the dice and that's okay. But maybe they will start expressing themselves, at least saying, okay, I swing my sword, and even having a smidgen of vocalization. Whereas if you were to play a pure, essentially mechanics-less game like Rory Story Cubes or Fiasco, where, yeah, that's a lot more to put on people. Conversely, you know, you're not going to, do you think, but beyond tailoring the game, like, you've got to be sensitive to what people are able to do, what people's limits are, what people aren't willing to do, what people aren't ready to do yet. What kinds of tips would you have for someone who's trying to use these things? And hello, Scrappy Kid, lovely to see you. But using role-playing games to afford introspection for ourselves, help reintegrate people into society. Do you have any tips for such folk?
So yeah, folks who basically, I guess, want to DM for the good of mankind, and going kind of in that way. I think, you know, to be honest, like, I think just like with so many things and so many like relationships and whatnot, it's communication, it's finding the right people. If you are putting a group together, you know, thinking about the dynamics and what those people would want. And if you don't know, then talking to them and asking them what they would want. And if they don't know what they would want, you know it, but you know them and you kind of know their temperament, you know, you can generally tell if someone's super gregarious and social and extroverted, or someone much prefers like rolling dice and kind of filling in a sheet, you know, like there's like both are good, both are awesome, both can contribute to the campaign, but it will help you to kind of, the more you know about your players, the better it will be. I also think there's one thing that both sort of my main DMs do, which I've always loved, which is that they talk to people about their characters outside the campaign, and they're like, what would you like to do with your character? What's the arc that your character's going for? How can I facilitate, you know, this for you within the campaign? And, you know, this led to me creating a bard lock a while ago, and that bard lock made a deal with the patron, a cursed patron, and this patron was sort of like determined by myself and the DM. We kind of like designed them like, you know, collaboratively, and stuff like that. Really, like, for me, that really increased my engagement. You know, the campaign was brilliant anyway, but the more that your players can put of themselves into what they're doing, the more engaged they will be. You know, it's just human nature. Like, it's what we like to do, right? We like to, and I think that's the other thing, is to always treat it as a collaborative experience. The worst D&D experiences I have had have not been based necessarily on a player who is acting up and ruining it for everyone. It is usually when the DM treats you as if you are not playing collaboratively. You know, they make sudden decisions, they put in weird rules, like they don't let you. I don't think that a DM should ever forbid something, you know, unless it's like something that is wildly at odds with, you know, say you're playing in Barovia, the Dark Vampire campaign, and then someone's like, you know what, I want to create Flurb the Chicken Man, and yeah, like, I don't know, he farts all the time, and like, you know, he's gonna like start shrieking randomly because of this, and like everyone's like, sorry, Flurb does not belong here. Like, we are doing a gritty, like, serious campaign. And, you know, Flurb might be perfect for another campaign, this imaginary character Flurb, but like, they are not suitable for that. But I hate it when a DM's like, you can't play tieflings in my campaign because like tieflings don't exist in like my homebrew world, so like no tieflings, you know, stuff like that. Like forbidding people's like species, like races, like just, again, making it more about the DM controlling. It is always collaborative. It is a story that you write together with the other people, and you may create the setup with that, but ultimately you don't know where it's going to go. And I think one of the worst things you can do is try and be like, here is my epic, the players must go through this like novel that I've written. Like, and they must, you can really see it with a lot of people, like DMs who are like clearly wannabe writers, and you're like, why don't you just write a book? Like, don't, because this isn't, you're not going to like make your story this way, because this isn't all about you. The story is there to be created with your players. And yeah, I think open communication, transparent, I think, you know, setting up your expectations, and I think just generally creating a friendly group environment where people feel that they can speak about those things. And I think as well that, you know, if you do have trouble with a player, you know, someone, I say trouble, but even if someone just doesn't seem very engaged, you know, like they've had a few sessions where they're not really interacting, you know, one session, a couple of sessions, that might be a life thing. They might just not be feeling very focused. They might be tired, but, you know, consistently you can speak to them and you can be like, you know, what can I do, like, to kind of like help you be interested? Like, what are you interested in playing? So yeah, I'm very much just rambling on the same point, but yeah, just, you know, communicate, be sensitive, be understanding, appreciate that like other people might not have your experience. This is quite a common one with you get the male DM and then you play as a woman and they just do lots of really uncomfortable like sexist things with like the female NPCs. You know, I had like that happen once, like with a random group that I played with, and I didn't feel comfortable enough to be like, yeah, that's actually not, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't like that, because I didn't really know the DM and I didn't like know the people, so I just left that group. But perhaps that would have been different if actually the DM had created an environment where I could have gone to him at the end and been like, it was actually really uncomfortable to me how you sort of depicted these female characters, and like I would prefer it if you kind of avoided it. But it's like other people were enjoying it, so I was like, this isn't the group for me. Like this is what they kind of like, and that makes me uncomfortable. Yeah. It's like
like it feels like everything, I mean, not just this, but so much in the end comes down to this awareness, mindfulness, communication, and yeah, informed consent, like kind of clarity. I think that clarity is so important that you can't, I mean, yeah, you can't really be kind or fair or without being clear. And so you need to be clear in yourself, like what's going on with this, and understanding of other people, like what's his likely to offend people, what's his, you know, propagating negative stereotypes, but having some awareness of the world, frankly, because there is a lot of intrinsic all sorts of misogyny and all sorts of like problems that are baked into the world at large. And being aware of these things and trying to make it so that the games we play and the worlds that we create kind of, unless the game is about exploring this problematic nature, because I would be all over a game which was about sexualized women, but kind of in a sense that explores the discomfort therein. Not like I would be wanting to play it tomorrow. I'd want to make sure that I'm in the right mind frame and everything, but that seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But unless you're doing it with a purpose, the world that you have is kind of the world that you want to live in. And yes, people might say, oh, but D&D, it has these evil people. Yes, because it's a power fantasy. Because there is evil. The evil in that game is only there to be triumphed over, frankly.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the heart of it. Being aware that Dungeons and Dragons is kind of a, it's all, everything is good. And so everything in there should be good. It should be a safe space, and don't try to be edgy. Don't try to be weird just for the sake of it. People are going to bring in their own little nuances and everything.
Oh yeah, and also like if you're ever considering a rape scene, just don't. Like it just amazing. Like it happened quite publicly, I think, recently, a couple of months ago, where there was a very large stream that had like the D&D, basically like the DM attempted to kind of like emulate, I think, like a kind of scene of like sexual assault, and you know, he's just like this straight white dude, like most of them are, and like you're kind of, and he like did it, and I believe that he's sort of got like cancelled afterwards effectively because it was just a very uncomfortable thing to do and people were very unhappy with it. And I kind of just think about that guy and I'm like, how did you come to a place where you felt that was a good thing for like your players to do? You know what I mean? Like that. And it's so much of it is just kind of just being sensitive and understanding that people have different experiences to you and that some of those experiences might be very upsetting, and to not put those into a world that is a power play fantasy world, because there is absolutely no way that this power play fantasy world can like begin to like meaningfully explore these very serious like issues that many people experience, you know?
100%. Now, it has been a great conversation. I want to be mindful of your time. We have chatted about so much. We've chatted about the soul-forged people in Dungeons and Dragons. And we talked about Hopefully Cheerful Engine, about Waterdeep and aggression, about the nature of play and what games are about, Ticket to Ride and trading as wasps in Catan, becoming like more dice than person, about Vicks Vaporub, about growing our own food, about soda streams, about Roll20.net. And then we started talking about being informed, about being able to consent, about actually giving that information to people up front, talking a wee bit about safety mechanisms, people getting on together, talking about releasing your urges within a safe, controlled environment, about introspection, about potentially feeling stomped over and making sure that you give voice to people, making sure that that doesn't happen, about via safety mechanisms, leveling up your real life communication skills, about being a good facilitator of these things does kind of come down to, just being a good GM, engaging players, making space for them to have agency, being empathetic, listening, or watching body language, about the responsibility of a facilitator in board games versus RPGs, like setting the tone, folk matching your energy, about obviously D&D itself being less rules-based than Pathfinder, the flexibility, allowing you to play as you want, having different folk with different desires playing together, about the nature that it is ultimately a privileged power fantasy. There is a lot of levity, and a lot of things are just not part of the game. But at the same time, if we don't want to explore racial stereotypes, those racial stereotypes or those sexist stereotypes should not be part of the game. That is clearly not okay. Talking about as a DM, you should try to understand the individuals. What do they want? What do they need? Allowing them to express themselves and select things, maybe. Opening up space for folk to have agency over the story flow. Setting boundaries. Reaching out to folk and talking one-to-one if someone seems to not be getting on with it. And of course, I want to say thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone in the comments, in the chats. Everyone was like, as usual, I'm happy to say everyone was really respectful and we had a couple of really nice comments. And if you want to check me out, of course, then I am Stuff by Bez everywhere. And if you want to check out Sarah, where do you most like to be found?
Twitter is my main hub on the internet. So twitter.com/Moogski, MOOGSKI Moogski. And my profile and whatnot and my portfolio and everything is on there. Thanks so much for having me today, Bez. I had a really great time chatting. We went to some pretty esoteric places. I really enjoyed that. And it
has been fantastic. And before I close, I want to give people just a minute to say, over to you. What are you up to? You can share, but only if you want to. So what are you up to after this? I am today Scrappy Coot, who pops into chat, a fellow streamer. We are going to be meeting. We are going to be eating together. We are going to be playing Groot, the board game by Leader Games. And I am super excited about that. And I'm basically doing a wee bit of a couple of quick things that I need to do, and then I'm heading over to Leicester Square. Very excited. What are you up to, Sarah?
Lovely. Just working for me. Nothing too exciting. So just getting on with my day, but very excited that got a new week. It's lovely. The weather is lovely. I've got my first dose of the vaccine. I will be ready to be unleashed out on the world again at large. So all good. Oh, thanks so much again, Bez. Oscar's having lunch and playing games. Oh, scrappy kid.
And so, yep, that is lovely. Of course, I am streaming again tomorrow. Streaming every day at 10 a.m. UK time. We are Thursday, the 10th of June. I am having my 400th stream. It is going to be super, super epic. Please share the word. And for now, if you're watching on Twitch, I will suggest that you join the raid. Let's raid our friend Idol Michael, I think, who is celebrating their 300th follower by doing some sort of Lego build, which might be exciting to see. And Idol is just a lovely person. So that's Michael Fox of Holding On Trouble Life of Billy Kerr that we mentioned earlier. Of course, other than that, is there any last words that you want to say, Sarah?
Now, again, just thanks so much for having me on the show. Thanks so much to everyone watching and being ever so patient with my rambling rants. And yeah, just lovely to be here. And yeah, I guess everyone just have a lovely week and play D&D good. So yeah. Bye.
This is a goodbye song. Bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye. This is the end of the show. Bye. And now it's time to go. Bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye. This is the end of the show. Bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye, Scrappy Kid. Bye, everyone else. Lots of love. Bye. And see you soon, Scrappy Kid. And see everyone else soon.